Hello and welcome to another tutorial. We're going to continue our discussion on GraalVM native image and how to compile our Java application to native executable binaries. And I mentioned that in the first step, we're just going to look at how generally we launch a Java application, right? And if you're using IDE, most of the details are hidden from you. But then it's a good practice to really know how to do it. And we know that in general, it's the terminal or the command line of the operating system that is the interface between the user, the human, and the hardware, right? You talk to the operating system through the terminal, through the command line, and then operating system understands what you're trying to do, and then it instructs the hardware to do it, and then the CPU does, for example, some calculations and returns the result back to the operating system, and then the operating system returns the result back to you. And terminal is available in all platforms: Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. Although I personally prefer Mac OS and Linux terminals. Windows is the command line that comes by default is not that great. From Windows 10, I believe they introduced a new shell, which is called the PowerShell. And there are also some standalone applications that you can install in Windows. They provide their own terminals. Same with Mac OS. For example, the default terminal that comes with Mac OS, I'm going to open it up. You can add customization to it. Right now, I'm running an application on top of the terminal called Fish. Fish is basically friendly interactive shell. So if you want to install it, which I highly recommend, you just go to internet and search for Fish. Let's go to Google, for example, and then search for download Fish. And then it's the Fish shell. So finally a command line shell for the night. So this is a very nice interactive shell. It has a lot of nice features like autocomplete, and then it has highlighting. For example, if I want to see which version of Fish you use, it already has nice intelligent suggestions. I just hit tab. It tells me what options are available. You can use the arrow up and down to switch between them. I'm going to just say hit Fish dash dash and then hit tab. It gives me lots of new suggestions. I can, for example, just select version, and it tells me which version of Fish I use, right? So Fish basically a command line application, or a basically an executable binary. And if you want to know where an application is, so basically whenever you type the name of an application, let's say Java, right? What you want to do, the operating system tries to understand this. And when you say Java, it means you're telling the operating system. Remember, you talk to the operating system via the terminal. And terminal is a fully text-based interface, right? Yeah, there is no, like other applications like this PowerPoint, it has a lot of nice interactive features. But terminals, usually they're just text-based, right? So you might think that terminals are actually not an easy thing to use. But then once you get accustomed to them, you realize that using terminals is very good for automating stuff. So because terminals also understand scripts, right? You can write shell scripts, or they're sometimes called shell script. And they usually have .sh extension on Mac OS and Linux. And then you can write very long shell scripts and execute them to automate a lot of stuff. So a lot of boring stuff. Terminals, if you just manually want to enter them in terminals, they're very tedious. But then because terminals or command lines also understand scripts, you can have a very large script and then run it, and terminal spends a lot of time executing them. You don't need to manually enter every line of code, right? So again, Java, when you type Java, it means you're telling the operating system to launch this binary, this executable application Java, which we know that it comes from the bin folder of the JDK, right? And then in order for the operating system to understand this, it has to first be able to locate a binary somewhere on your hard disk called Java, right? And we know that this exists, right? If you want to know if the operating system or the terminal is able to locate a binary, an executable application, there is a command called which. And it comes, I believe, by default with with macOS terminal and Linux. For Windows, again, these commands are very different because Windows is not Unix based. We know that macOS and Linux are Unix based, so they follow the same patterns. They say same commands. So which Java? And it tells me that it can find an application, an executable binary called Java, which is in my from the root of my hard disk. It goes to the library folder, Java virtual machine, JDK 17, contents, home, bin, Java. So it says that basically when you type Java, the operating system or the terminal, when it tells the operating system what to do, it actually replaces this Java with this line, right? Because operating system only understands the full name of the application. There is the reason that you are able to do this simplification, remember, this is just a simplification for the human eye, because it's very tedious to every time you have to type this. Let's say I want to know which version of the Java I'm using. You have to type this whole name, library, you give it the full path, and then on -- version. And it tells me I'm using Java 17 LTS, which is the Oracle hotspot, right? This is not the OpenJDK version, for example. But because this is very tedious, especially if you have lots of directories and then your binary application is there, what the operating systems allow you to do is predefine these paths. So this library, home, bin, all this is called a path, right? Or a directory that some executable binaries can be found in this bin directory. And operating systems provide a feature called the environment variable. So environment variables, and every terminal you can define environment variables for them. In macOS and Linux, you can define environment variables for the terminal. In Windows, you kind of need to define the global environment variables for the operating system. And again, you talk to the operating system through the terminal or the command line. But my emphasis for these lectures is mostly on macOS and Linux because they're more friendly in terms of interacting with the terminals. Their support for the terminals and interaction with the humans is more friendly. But I will have lectures about Windows and how to use the terminal there. So there is a command called echo. And then this allows you to see the value of the global environment variables that your terminal currently understands. And one of them is called path. Now, if I type echo path, this echo means whatever text that comes after this, just echo it back to the terminal. So it's just path. So it doesn't understand that this is not a text. I mean an environment variable. So to differentiate between a text and a variable, you have to use a $sign. $path in macOS and Linux. In Windows, I believe it's a double %. So in Windows, for example, you type this. Here, it doesn't understand. In macOS and Linux, you have to use a $. Now, as you can see, now it gives me a list of directories, user, local bin, and one of them is library, Java virtual machine, JDK 17, contents, home, bin. What this means is that I've already added this directory to my path environment variable. And with this, whenever I type Java, basically what happens is that because the terminal realizes that this is not a path. Any path starts with either /, which means from the root of the hard disk, or /. So whenever you declare a path in terminal, you either start from absolute path, which means from the root, which is / in macOS and Linux, or forward. This means this is a relative path from the current working directory, which is this folder Mesa, right? So this is my current, if you want to know what directory you are in. And again, this is another feature of the terminals or command lines. Whenever you talk to the operating system, it means you are running or executing an application or a command in the terminal, right? And in order to be able to do that, you have to be inside some working directory. So there is a command called pwd, or print working directory, and it tells you where you are. For example, I can go from the current directory, I can go into my desktop folder, and now I'm inside the desktop. Now, usually for the home directory, so this usually when you log into your operating system, the terminal by default is inside your home directory, right? And there is actually and different users of the same computer, they get different home directories, right? They have separate home, and inside the home you usually have desktop folder, documents folder, downloads folder. So if I go back up to my home directory and do a ls means list all the files and directories. See, every user gets its own library folder, music, movies, I don't know, whatever, documents, downloads, desktop, right? So every user gets its own copy of these folders on the hard disk, right? So whenever some user logs in with their username and password, then these folders are basically, the operating system knows which folders to present. Different folders have different home directories, right? That's completely separate. But the root directories are the same. For example, /library, this is a root directory. There is no dot here, which means this is an absolute path from the root of the hard disk, which is the /, right? Now, obviously in Windows, I believe you have to say the name of the drive, something like this, drive C or drive D. In macOS and Linux, usually we don't have many partitions. There's usually one partition, and that's the root, right? And you always start from. So for example, all the users, they get different directories, home directories, right? So their files, whatever one user puts on their own desktop, is different from the files that others put on their own desktops. But everybody sees the same, for example, root directory, the same library directory, etc. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that whenever you type, whenever you type an application, the terminal realizes that you're not specifying a path. This is just a name, right? So it tries to search for the name of that application in all the directories that are in the path directory, and it always starts from the first one. And usually applications come with a bin directory, which is short for binary. Binary means all the command line executable applications. In the JDK, we know that there is a bin that has jar, Java, Java C, etc. So whenever I type Java, the operating system or the terminal starts from the first directory that is in the path, and you can have multiple directories in the path environment variable. And then it realizes that there is no application called Java in the bin directory here. So it goes to the next one, right? And then it doesn't find it. It goes to the next one, user local bin. It doesn't find a Java application. So it goes to the next one, library, Java, virtual machine, JDK 17, contents, home bin. And then it finds a Java here. And then it stops searching and assumes that this is what you mean. So basically, if you have multiple directories, so I can have JDK 17 and 16 both on my path environment variable, but when the terminal tries to search for this application, it starts from the first directory, and the first instance of this application that it finds, it stops searching. So if I have JDK 17 and after that it comes JDK 16, the Java that we execute or the terminal finds is the JDK 17. So it's first come, first serve, right? The very first directory that the terminal finds this application, it stops searching and assumes that that's what you want. So my recommendation is that whenever you try to launch Java from terminal, always check the version first, hyphen version, and these hyphen stuff, they are called the command line arguments. We will come back to these concepts later when we try to develop a full version of a command line application in Java and then compile it to native binary. All the native binary applications, the convention is that they accept command line arguments. Usually it's either 1 hyphen or 2 hyphen. So you can say Java hyphen version, and it also works. So this application understands both hyphen version and hyphen version. Sometimes you don't need to write the full name, hyphen v for example. Now it says it doesn't recognize that, so this is not a valid argument. We can try hyphen v, it also doesn't understand. So you either use hyphen version or hyphen version with this particular application Java, right? So that's mainly the concept of environment variables, right? Especially path. Path is very important. There are two environment variables that we typically need to set up. One is Java home, Java underscore home. And you see all these names, these are very similar to how we define global constants in Java applications, right? All caps, the names are separated with underscore. The same here, whenever you see this kind of thing, this is a global environment variable. So every instance of the terminal that you run, they all understand this one. And this is you define in a file called bashrc. So there is a, if I say in my home directory, if I say ls-a to show all the hidden files, there is one called bash profile, and then there is one called bash rc, right? And then usually what happens, bash is the name of this terminal, right? Born again shell. So if you want to see, and then usually you define these global variables like Java home in the bash rc or bash profile. So for example, I've manually defined this global variable in this, right? So we can look at the contents of the bash rc. We're going to say less, for example. Less is a command line that prints the contents of a text file. It's an application that prints the context of a text file to the terminal. So dot bash rc, for example, and you see I've defined this environment variable called Graal home. I have Java home, for example. If you want to comment a line in your bash rc, you can use the # or #. So these are commented. This Java home, you see previously I had JDK 15 as my Java, and then JDK 14, and now I have JDK 17 as my Java home. And then you can append this to the path environment variable. And usually what you do is Java home is the home directory, and you want to add the directory that has all the executable binaries to the path, right? Path is used to search for the name of the applications. So it's not just Java home /bin, the bin directory of Java home. So Java home is a convention that people use when you install a JDK. Java home points to the home directory. Inside the home directory of the JDK, there is a bin directory, right? You set it up. Same with Graal home. Once we download and install GraalVM, you want to add the home directory to define it as a global variable, right? It's not necessary, but it's easier because instead of writing this line path down, you can just tell the terminal Graal home and it understand what you're talking about. So I'm going to hit Q to exit the less application. And if you want to see that, so if I type, if I want to see if Java home is set, I can tell the terminal, see if there is an environment variable called Java home, which we declare with $. Echo means read the contents of this and print it to the terminal. If you don't have an environment variable, write that, let's say Java underscore home 2. It doesn't print anything because it means there is no global environment variable called Java underscore home 2. But there is a global environment variable called Java home. And the usefulness of this is that then if you want to launch Java application and you haven't added that to the path, you can say Java home /bin/Java. This works fine. The terminal understands that you're using a $, so you are trying to reach the contents of a global environment variable called Java home. So the terminal actually behind the scenes replaced this line of code with the contents of this environment variable -- version. So it's the same story, right? Now GraalVM also comes with its own version of the JDK, which is very similar to the, let's say, Oracle. So it also has a Java. So now this tells me that this JDK is based on the Open JDK. It's not the hotspot from Oracle. Open JDK GraalVM Community Edition, right? So again, these environment variables are very easy, basically very convenient, because then you can quickly differentiate between a Java that comes from this JDK and one that comes from the GraalVM, right? So if I just type Java, the operating system, even if I have both the Graal home bin and the Java home bin on my path environment variable, the terminal only finds the Java, the first instance that it finds, which is the Java from the Java home bin directory. Then it stops searching, right? So it assumes that that's what you mean. That's why even if you have both these Javas on your path, you cannot use them with the Java word. You have to differentiate them. So the easiest thing to do, have the global environment variables for the home directories, and then use those, which shortens this long path, that instead of writing this every time, you just write Java home with the $, and then the terminal understands what you're talking about. All right. So depending on which one of these Java home bean or Graal home bean are on your path environment variable, which one comes first, then the term, if you just type Java, the terminal finds one of them. Now you can change the path environment variable using the export command in the terminal itself. This is a live change, and this only applies to the current session of terminal. So if I say path export path equals let's say we apply this bean from the Graal home and then colon, which is called the path separator. In macOS and Linux, you separate different directory paths in the path environment variable with colon. And so we tell it, hey, replace path with its old content, but then put the bin directory of the Graal home at the beginning. So this comes first. And this works. And now if we go echo path, you see the GraalVM bin directory comes first. All right. And then what happens here is that now what we do is, let's clear the all right, so I guess now if we say which Java, all right, so something went wrong. Let's go back here and open the terminal again. So echo path, that's the path, right? And I think let's see, so we put this command had a problem, so let's echo path again. Okay, yeah, so I guess there is a problem with this approach, and that's probably because of this fish application that we're using. Let's see if we can exit it and go back to the, yeah, so this is the original terminal so the path is there, right? And then if we say export path equals Graal home / bin colon and then path itself and then echo path, and now it works, right? So now you see the bin comes first, the bin directory of the, so if I now say Java -- version, it says that that Java application that the terminal finds, the first instance comes from the first directory in the path, which is now the GraalVM Java, right? It's the JVM. But then if I close the terminal, go back up again, when you do the export command in the terminal itself, it only applies to the current terminal shell, right? If you close it and open a new window, those exports are gone. If you want every terminal session to have read all the basically all the global variables, then you have to define them in the bash rc file, right? So in the home directory, you have the bash rc, and you see whenever you launch a terminal, it loads this contents of this bash rc. So it exports this environment variable, defines them, appends these to the bash, the path, and then it also, I've set it to also run the fish command line application, which is a nice interactive terminal, right? So I'm just going through these concepts so that you are aware what we're trying to do. All right. Now I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and from the next lecture we are going to continue to see how we actually run a Java application from the command line, the concepts such as class path, and then we're going to see, for example, what's the difference between running the Java application using the JVM or the Java command, and how we can use the native image compiler to compile to the native binary, and then how to execute that one, right? Especially if your application accepts command line arguments, we will discuss the difference between the two. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Please stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.